All right, y'all. I think it's safe to say that work from home is here to stay at this point. If you're like me and finished college and started working in the last couple of years, you've probably done both fully in person, fully remote, and hybrids of the two, right? Well, I think the two do have pros and cons, which is why I prefer hybrid the most. We have to be honest and say that it can be hard to be as productive at home as we are in the office, right? When I go to the office, I get up early, I take a shower, I get dressed, I go to work, and then I stroll in my office, sit right down, and get going, right? Versus at home, roll out of bed, hit the snooze a couple times, then eat breakfast. Like it's just a different intro to the day, and so it's hard to carry a head of steam until the end. Right? It's hard to like be productive as the hours go on. And so in this video, I want to talk about how I've learned to do that. Right. So every week on my at home days and my in office days, I get just as much done. I'm just as productive at home as I am in the office. And I'm going to tell you how, right? So I think ultimately it comes down to three main things in this order of importance: environment, the work itself, and rituals. Oops. And I want to talk about each of these over the course of this video. So let's start with our environment, right? So while environment can be the most important part, it's also like kind of the simplest, right? It's all the stuff your mom told you when you were a teenager. Like, clean up your shit, be consistent, and touch some damn grass, right? I think these are like the main three, right? So don't have, junk and dirty clothes and food everywhere. Like, pretend that coworkers are coming to your apartment regularly to work. Right? You want to hold your working space at home, which is usually your home, to the same standard that you would your office, right? Your presentation of yourself at work. Being consistent, I mainly mean consistent from day to day about where you work, but I also mean consistent with your office environment, right? So if you work at a table, like maybe you're an intern, they just gave you a folding table. If you work at a table at work, maybe you should work at a table at home. If you have a desk in an office at work, you should probably work at your desk at home. And if you work at Google or something and everybody sits on like couches and beanbags, and sit on your couch at home, right? I don't think this one's as important as being consistent day over day, like picking a spot in your apartment to work and getting stuff done every day. But I think it's also a factor there, right? Being consistent about that. And what I mean by touching grass is like, just because we're working remotely doesn't mean we have to work from home, right? So when I first worked remotely, I actually lived the 10 minutes from my alma mater because I basically graduated college and was finishing up a lease there and hadn't moved out to my employer yet. And so I would go to campus a lot. Like if I was having a rough morning and couldn't seem to get the ball rolling, I would like get up, get out the door, go to campus and work in the library or work in an empty classroom or whatever other spots I'd worked during college, right? Because I'd spent 4 years conditioning myself to be productive in these places. And so when I go back there, it's easy to get right back in that flow, even to this day, like almost 2 years later. So yeah, so don't be afraid to go outside. Even go to a coffee shop, right? It's just something to jazz it up and get outside and get a little bit more energy. And I also want to add one more thing here, our appearance. Because at least to me, this is kind of a subjective thing. It can vary a lot from people to people. Like I find my appearance to be part of my environment a lot of the times, right? So like I shower every day just because, but I especially shower in the morning when I'm starting to work and I get dressed. I mean, I dress pretty casually, like I'm in gym clothes right now, but I think there's a world of difference between unshowered in our PJs, just kind of like rolling out of bed like we would any other day on a Saturday when we get to sleep in, right? Versus actually getting up, getting clean, getting dressed, right? It's just, again, we're trying to enter that work mode, which I think we'll talk more about towards the end of the video with rituals, but it's an important factor here, right? So yeah, these are the main aspects of our environment I think matter the most for getting stuff done at home. And now I want to talk about the work we do, right? So I mean two things here mainly. Number one is intentionality. And number two is selection. So let's start with intentionality, right? Realize it or not, there are lots of reminders in the office of what we're supposed to be doing at any given point. Like maybe you have like stuff laid out on your desk or something on your whiteboard from the day before, or you just had a meeting with your team, right? You explicitly talked about what you're supposed to be doing. Whatever it is, there's lots of subconscious reminders of what we're supposed to be doing versus when we're in our like personal environment, our home environment. Most of those don't really exist until we like open up our laptop, right? Point here being that we should really be intentional about what we're trying to work on. So I usually spend the beginning of my day like planning out what I'm going to work on for that day a lot more in depth than I would at the office. So at the office, like maybe, I work on something in the morning and then I have a meeting at noon for a different project. And so it makes sense in the afternoon to work on that different project. Like again, there's lots of cues and reminders to work on certain things throughout the day. And usually for me, I can kind of ride off of those and what I feel like working on any given point. Versus at home, we kind of need to put that input energy in ourselves and really sit down and be like, okay, what am I going to do today? I have to make sure I'm being productive, right? The second thing here is selection. So in my experience, it seems like different people like to do different things at home versus in the office, right? And I'll give a good example here between a coworker and I. My coworker, who's a senior software engineer versus I'm an entry level, right? He likes to do all of his coding and stuff at home and his administrative like crap in the office. Versus me, I like to do my administrative stuff at home and my coding in the office. And I think there's two main reasons that we actually sat and talked about as to why, right? Number one, he's really senior, so he kind of just needs to avoid distractions like me when he's getting all of his coding done, right? Versus me, I'm new and I'm new to some of the projects I work on. A lot of times I do genuinely need help, or it's just nice to have somebody, pop in and check on me like, hey, what's new, right? Or have meetings where I can bring up my concerns or questions or whatever, like comments. But for him, especially too, because he works with a lot fewer people than I do, I'm like kind of a larger team. He just needs to concentrate. He just needs to write, right? And he can mostly do that autonomously. So that's number one. And number two there, he takes off in the middle of the week versus I take off on the edges, like Mondays and Fridays. I shouldn't say take off because we're trying to work from home, not take off from home. But you get what I'm saying. Stay at home Mondays and Fridays, right? And so, like for me, doing administrative stuff at home kind of at home on those edge days kind of serves as a great warm up or cool down for the week, right? So Monday, like I'm just getting back from the weekend and I'm like, oh my God, what was going on again? And I read my emails and I look at the presentations I was working on or the reports I'm writing or whatever. And I just kind of get context for what's happening, right? Just to remind myself. And on Friday, it's the same thing, but it's like a cool down. Let me write everything down. Let me review what I did for the week so that going into next week, I'm in a good position, right? But during the middle of the week, that's when I'm in full swing. Like that's when I'm trying to be peak productive. And the same goes for him. It's just for him, he's at home during that middle of the week. And for me, I'm at home on the edges, right? So this is just an example of preferences between two different people that will affect what you choose to do at home versus in the office. And the important thing is that we are, again, intentional about what we're choosing to do at home versus in the office. Because in my experience, again, we'll be much more productive at some things than others, right? So yeah, the main theme of our work here, the work itself, is being intentional about what we're doing and being thoughtful about it, right? Cool. Okay, so that's our work. And lastly here, I want to talk about rituals. But before I start this section, I want a huge disclaimer. Because if you're like me, you saw all the morning ritual YouTube videos and you just like beat yourself to death trying to get this crazy morning ritual that will jetpack you into productivity for the entire day. And at least in my experience, those tend to be either straight up lies or at least overblown, right? I have a morning ritual and other rituals throughout the day, which I'll talk about, but they, as you'll see shortly, they're pretty lax. They're pretty general, and I don't do them every day. Like, I'm human, right? But what I do think is important is that the rituals which you choose, whatever they are, serve two purposes, right? The first one is entering work mode. Some people call it like flow or the zone, whatever the hell you want to call it, right? It doesn't really matter. But we have this like mental state that we're in when we're working. Realize it or not, right? Like every time I sit down in the office to work, I'm like, okay, let's focus, right? Here we go. And I just, boom, enter work mode, stop checking my phone, stop checking my emails, and I just like write code or write my report or whatever the heck I'm supposed to be doing, right? That mental state, we want to replicate it at home so that we can replicate the performance at home as we would in the office, right? That's the first point of these rituals. And the second point is preventing what I call like fog here. And basically what I mean by that is going back to like subtle cues and reminders that we get in the office and might not realize. It's pretty easy when we're working from home to kind of like lose track of the day, like lose track of what's happening. Like, what was I working on? What was I supposed to be working on? What time is it? Like, who knows? Like, it's easy to lose track of these things, but easier at home than it is in person, right? And so the rituals I have, which again, you'll see are pretty lax, just serve these two functions to prevent entering that like loss of bearing of where we are, and to make sure that we can enter work mode and actually be productive, right? And so now let's talk about the actual rituals I have. So my morning ritual really just serves the first purpose. The day's starting, right? So we kind of know where we're at, but it really just serves the first purpose. So I wake up in the morning, I eat breakfast, and I watch a YouTube video. I try to watch a YouTube video about work, but I got to be honest with myself, not everyone is about work. Some about like Call of Duty or something. But I just sit and I like eat breakfast, take like 15, 20 minutes to chill out. And then I go take a shower, and then I get back and I check my emails and I check my like Teams messages or whatever, all the general like communication stuff, just kind of get warmed up. And then as a final warm up, if I have it, which I don't often, so it's kind of a treat sometimes, like if I have to read a research paper, I like to do that in the morning too. Because again, it's kind of like easy, you know, it helps me contextualize what I'm doing. It's interesting if it's different enough. Like it's just a good kind of intro to the day. But I don't do those every day. Usually I just check my emails to start working, right? Actually writing code or doing whatever. So that's my morning ritual. So I'll say like morning. And then I do a walk at lunch. So I usually like kind of eat through or work through lunch. Maybe that's not the best habit, but it's what I do usually. And so instead of like taking a lunch to eat and watch YouTube videos and all that stuff, like I mentioned for the morning, I just kind of go on a walk. Like I go on a walk like 30 minutes or so, call my mom or my girlfriend or whoever else, right? And just kind of like take a second to breathe, and then come right back and get right into the action. So that again serves to like divide the day in two. So if you know, usually in the office, we work in the morning, we're in morning mode, and then we have like lunch and a meeting right after. And then in the afternoon, as the day starting to wind down, we enter that like afternoon mode. And so again, like I'm trying to have our mental state mirror our mental state in the office. And then lastly here, speaking of mental state in the office, I usually cut myself off at 4 p.m. or at least take a break, right? So I, like a lot of times I'll come back and work on something at like 7 or 8 when I'm back from the gym, or took just a little break or did whatever I was going to do for that afternoon. But I very, very rarely work like 4, 5, 6, like those hours. And I think the reason is like when I'm in the office, I'm usually working from 8 to 4. And so by 4, I want to go home. I'm like, good. And that kind of like circadian rhythm bleeds into my days working from home. And so even if I still have stuff to get done, like I realize that those hours from 4 to 6 are probably not going to be peak productivity, right? So I just stop. I go take a break. I make the most of that time. And then later, if I'm like really excited about what I'm doing or really like pressed on a deadline, I get right back to work. So yeah, these things all serve these two purposes of helping us enter work mode and preventing fog throughout the day. They're not that intense. They're not that crazy. And I don't do them every day. Like today, I was working on something that I'm really excited about, and I've been thinking about it last night. And so I just kind of like woke up, like ate breakfast, and I was going to go in the shower like I normally do, but I was like, you know what? Like, I really just want to work on this. Like, I'm ready to go. Let me just do it. And then I started working, and I worked like a good 2 or 3 hours, like in my PJs, like we just talked about not doing. And then by the end of it, I was like, okay, like I smell, I'm sick of this. I want to go take a shower and like take a 30-minute or so break and then come back at it. Right. So I don't do the same thing every day, but just being cognizant of these rituals and why we do them will help us be productive throughout the day. So that concludes the rituals discussion and pretty much the discussion of this in general, right? So our environment, our work itself, and our rituals around that work, in my experience, are things that are going to help us the most, right? And the main goal here is that to mirror our performance at work, we should mirror with our performance at home. We should mirror like the environment that we're working on or working in, the kinds of stuff that we're doing and the manner in which we select that stuff, and the mental state that we're in when we're in the office versus at home. Because if those two things are totally different, why would you expect our performance to be the same? Right? It doesn't make any sense. So yeah, working from home, it can be challenging, but it's not really that complicated. After a little while, like I do find that working from home is a skill. So if you are working from home and feel like you're not getting anything done, like you're not alone. I've been there. It just takes practice. And practice, in my experience, around these three things. So yeah, thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, like and leave a comment. And if you like this kind of content, I'd encourage you to subscribe. I'm making content about professional development for engineers. I studied aerospace engineering in college, and now I work in software and machine learning. And yeah, I feel like I've learned a little bit, and I'd like to share that with other people and hopefully have their experiences shared back to me so we can all grow, achieve our wildest dreams in our careers, and make a whole load of money. Isn't that what we all want, right? So yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.